Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm transgender, non-binary, genderqueer. My pronouns are they, them, and I have endometriosis, which, if you don't know what that is, that basically means that my uterus is evil and the uterine lining that sheds during your period is slowly consuming all of my other organs. And it turns out that about 10% of people who have uteruses have endometriosis, supposedly. And most of the research and the support out there I've found seems to be aimed at cis straight women. And I wasn't really able to find anything that reflected my experience of having this disease and being trans, and all of the complications that go into kind of navigating the medical system and finding support when that's my experience. So, I was hoping to just throw this out there to see if it could help anybody else who might be going through this. So, from here on out, I will refer to my evil uterus as Bertha, because that is what I have named her. I picture Bertha as this crotchety old lady with curlers in her hair. She wears like a faded pink house coat and bunny slippers. And she has a cane, not because she needs it, she just likes to whack people with it. So, my uterus part personified as Bertha, that's her. So I've been living and on my journey with Bertha for about 2 years now. This started a couple of summers ago. I was working at a summer camp and I was teaching theater to young girls, and one morning I got up at 7 o'clock to get the girls off to breakfast, and all of a sudden I just had this really intense pain in my right side, and I had no idea what was happening. I couldn't walk anymore. I felt dizzy, nauseous. So the camp nurse came to get me and rushed me to the hospital because they figured that I had appendicitis. So they ran all of the tests. It turns out it wasn't that. And mind you, this is happening and I'm in the middle of nowhere in Maine. So it was not appendicitis. And then they had to do a transvaginal ultrasound, which is they stick a stick up you and take pictures. And what they found was that I'd had an ovarian cyst that burst. So officially they couldn't say that that's actually what I had because all of that was left was the fluid that was left over. So they gave me some painkillers and sent me back to camp. Fast forward about 5 months from then, my doctor had switched up my birth control because I guess that wasn't doing what it needed to do. And it was okay, but my periods were way longer on that, and it hurt more, which it hadn't in the past. I'd been lucky before. And then I was in a theater rehearsal one day, and about with 20 minutes left to go, I felt that same really sharp, sudden pain again in my right side. So when rehearsal was over, I called my roommate and was like, hey, I need you to take me to urgent care. Urgent care was closed, so then we had to go to the ER again. I told them that, like, hey, this summer I had an ovarian cyst burst. I'm feeling the same way again. It's probably this. So they did all the same tests that they had over the summer. I did not have appendicitis again. And they did the transvaginal ultrasound again, which, if you haven't had one, it hurts like hell. And I knew that it was going to. So as the technician was doing it, I was just sobbing on the table. And he was horrified because that's not usually what happens. I guess it's not supposed to hurt that bad, but I guess it does when things have exploded inside of you. So it turned out it was the same thing, and that had happened before, and they described it in the same way, but they didn't say that it was an ovarian cyst that time, because apparently my stomach was inflamed from having something explode right near it, and I'd been in the hospital for like 8 hours at that point, so my doctor had switched over, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning at that point, and the new doctor who came on his shift told me that he wasn't really sure what was wrong, and I just have a bellyache, so I can go home. And if I wasn't still in so much pain, I would have punched his lights out. But it was 2 a.m. and I just wanted to get out of there. So my gynecologist switched up my birth control again, and this time I was still having a lot of pain during my period, and now I had new symptoms of being really nauseous for the entire week of it and not being able to eat. So I went through a few months of just like living off of cereal for the entire week of my period. Then I was still having issues with that, so for a few months, so she switched it again, and then after that I was having my period every other week, and I was still super nauseous during it, so I would go an entire week in a lot of pain and living off of cereal, and then the next week when it was over, I would just eat everything in my house because I was literally starving, and that pattern went on for about 3 months and wreaked a bit of havoc on my body. And then in May of that year, I was working in a hotel at the front desk, and it was maybe like 10 o'clock at night, so I was by myself there, and I felt that same pain in my right side again. It had been getting worse and worse for a couple of months at that point, and it was like mostly around my period, but it would linger like a few days before and a few days after, so I'd have like a week maybe out of the month that I felt okay. So I was just behind the desk, doubled over in pain, but I was by myself and I didn't know what to do. My shift got off at 11 and I knew that I had the morning shift at 7 a.m. and I couldn't find anybody to cover me, so I had to go into work the next day, and it took me 2 days to get to the hospital again to get checked out, and the third time that I was in the hospital I had to have another transvaginal ultrasound, which had traumatized me both times before, and the technician was this like 50-year-old, very stern-looking lady, and she wanted me to do it myself, and I couldn't bring myself to do it because I'm human, and I can't just cause myself that much pain on my own free will. And then she just sat there and was really judgmental about it, and she was just like, have you never had sex before? What's wrong with you? And I just felt really judged, and that she was obviously not taking my pain seriously at all. And really, that just felt like a super inappropriate question to ask at that moment. So after the third hospital visit, I was referred to a gynecologist that actually lived in the area, because I was living in New York at that time, and my doctor, through my parents' insurance, was in Massachusetts, so I couldn't actually physically go there on a regular basis. But for the third hospital visit, I actually got referred to a gynecologist in the area. We switched up my birth control again, and I was just in pain all the time. I bled for a month straight, which was horrible. And then they switched it again, but I saw a different gynecologist, and she was super judgmental of me for not knowing like how exactly an IUD works and whether or not that would be effective in preventing cysts, even though it stopped the bleeding, which felt like I felt really inadequate, but it wasn't my fault at all because I'm not a doctor. That's why I go there. Then I moved out to Ohio for grad school. I was still having these problems all the time, and it just kept getting worse and worse until I got to the point I started tracking my period and my symptoms on the Planned Parenthood app. And I went in November to see the school doctor, and she referred me for another ultrasound, switched up my birth control again. I think at this point I haven't had a pain-free day since like October or September, and it is now September of 2017, so it's been almost a year, and it just continued to get worse and worse until like half the days of the month I couldn't even stand up straight. There'd be a couple of days every week that I literally could not get off of my couch or stand for more than 5 minutes. So in April, I was told that the doctor that I was seeing suspected that it might be endometriosis. So she referred me to a specialist who could test me for that, because it turns out you need surgery to do that. And it took 3 months just to get an appointment with him, and then another month and a half to undergo the surgery for it, which they make 3 different incisions into your stomach and just put a camera inside of you to kind of look around and see where there's scar tissue, and if they find it, they remove it. So after 2 years of all of this, of being in and out of the gynecologist on almost a monthly basis by now, being misgendered the whole time, but not really feeling like I can correct people, because people's language abilities tend to fall apart the second that you tell them that you're non-binary and you use they, them pronouns. they just all of a sudden forget how to talk. And this was a situation where I was like, I need you to know how to talk. So the results came back, and it was endometriosis, which is, it feels good to know what's happening and to have like some sort of answer. But now I know that ahead of me I've got a pretty long journey of old white men telling me that they need to preserve my uterus and my fertility for my future husband, because he might want babies. It doesn't really matter what I want, or that I'm trans, or that I don't want my own children, or that my dysphoria wouldn't let me go through pregnancy. It just feels a lot like I'm being treated on the basis of statistics and not my own experiences and needs, regardless of whether or not I know that's right for my body. And it's kind of complicated things looking forward to my transition, because I don't know, like, even if I wanted to start testosterone, if I'd be allowed to, because there's not a whole lot of research on the long-term impacts of that, and there's not a whole lot of research on endometriosis, so who knows if they'd even let me if I wanted to, or how that would affect things. I've got all sorts of bizarre heteronormative patriarchal things, which, even if I'm sitting there next to my partner who identifies as a cis woman, like, we get told, like, no, Shannon needs to keep their uterus in case they change their mind about the whole trans and gay thing. Because sometimes women change their minds about wanting babies. So that's been frustrating as hell, and like, even if I were to start testosterone, I don't know if I'd be able to legally transition and change my gender marker and things like that, because then I might not be able to get health insurance, and I'm apparently stuck with Bertha for a while, so there's that. So yeah, at this point, I guess I'm just waiting to hear back about what the treatment options are. I have an appointment next week to find out about that. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thanks for listening, and hope this helps some other queer kid out there know that we're not alone and our experience matters.